Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in management technologies. Today's discussion focuses on Power BI integration that was introduced in version 2002 of ConfigMgr, and ConfigMgr, of course, is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So here's our agenda as we get started. Talk about first, what is Power BI integration? Really, what is Power BI? Probably you know already, but just to say it, why we care about Power BI integration. And we're going to step through like we normally do, talk about the requirements for Power BI integration, talk about how it works, see it being configured, and then finally watch in action how this thing works. Now, before we jump into this, I want to make sure we understand what this session is and what it is not. This session is an opportunity to understand how Power BI gets integrated into Configuration Manager. This is not this is not a session for authoring Power BI reports. Yes, you will see some Power BI reports as a part of demonstrating the integration, but I'm not going to talk to you at all about authoring. So we have had some previous discussions where we've talked about authoring. We can do that again in the future if there's interest, but for this session, it's going to strictly be on the Power BI integration. So what is Power BI specifically? What is Power BI integration? Same kind of thing. So Power BI basically is an updated report format. I'm sure that you've seen Power BI reports. They've been out for quite a while. Power BI, a combination of software, services, apps, connectors to be able to get your data into a format that's visually immersive, provides ability to drill into certain segments of the data, gives you insights, uh, helps you model the data in ways that might be unique and useful. Oftentimes with Power BI, folks will discover things about their data that they may not have realized in other formats, right? It's a very cool way to present data. So let's compare and contrast that for a minute to the native configuration manager reports that have been in the product for years. Those reports are good, provide great data, needed data for the config manager admin. But those reports, in most cases, are tabular in nature. They can be thousands of lines long, depending on what you're running and what your environment looks like, and so on. And it's very easy then to get lost in the minutia of the data and lose the story of what the data is telling you. Whereas with Power BI, it's a graphical version of that data, perhaps, and it's easier to track what you're wanting to see in a graphical type format and then drill in further to hone in on certain types of data. It's just a really cool way. One of the things that, at least in my mind, makes sense is that the configuration manager reporting is great for people who run configuration manager, right? IT admins. It's not so great for presenting data to leadership. Power BI is phenomenal for presenting data to leadership. And so that's, kind of maybe a difference. And maybe that starts to dovetail into the why Power BI integration, providing the ability to visualize data in a modern way, in an impactful way, in a compelling way, right? There are performance benefits of using Power BI, perhaps versus standard SQL Server reporting services. Okay, so I don't know what the metrics are, but certainly we document that the performance of Power BI is more streamlined than other methods. So you would expect to be able to add this integration and not really see any impact performance-wise, because you're either going to be running SSRS reports, which you probably run for a number of years already in your environment, or you're going to be running Power BI, and Power BI should be more streamlined than SSRS reports, and so it should be good, right? Now, there's a couple of formats for Power BI where we can store data, right? Maybe even more than this, but two that you'll see in this session. One is what's called the PBIX format, right? And the other is the PBIT format. So one, as you can see on the screen, the PBIX is a reporting format. PBIT is a template format. What's really the difference here, right? Well, a PBIT is what's called a Power BI template file. This particular format is one that does not include any data in it from the system where it was generated. So think of it this way. If you build a Power BI report that you want to share with the community, but you don't want to expose your data to the community while doing so, you can save that as a template file. And the template file will contain the structure of the report, but will not contain any data from the report. And so it's a good way to provide the format without the data. Right? The PBIX, by contrast, allows you to import the report, yes, but it also will contain data from your environment. So that if that doesn't matter to you, then however you want to do it. But the PBIX is the native format that we expect, or that Power BI expects, whenever it tries to open data. Right? So you'll see that as we go along here in a bit. But those are the two formats that we're going to work with as we go through. So with Power BI, there's on-prem options, there's cloud options. So the ones that you're going to see with the Power BI integration discussion today are all on-prem, right? There's nothing that I'm going to do that's in the cloud. Now, if you go and look for documentation on the web about Power BI integration and ConfigMgr, you'll find it for sure. You'll find some things, though, that are published about how to integrate Power BI and ConfigMgr prior to when Power BI integration was introduced in 2002. Right? So just beware that some of the things you'll see, while they're accurate and while they're very helpful prior to 2002, they don't describe what you'll see me do in 2002 necessarily, right? So be aware of that. And then SQL integration is also one. So jumping ahead a little bit, you're going to see me in the configuration step do a couple of things. First, you're going to see me early on remove SQL Server Reporting Services role from SQL. And then you're going to see me add what's called the Power BI Reporting Server, and then go and configure some things, right? What might be in your mind as we go through this, what certainly was in my mind as we go through this, is if we take away SQL Server Reporting Services from SQL, does that mean that we can no longer use our native SQL Server Reporting Services reports? And the answer is no. You can use SQL Server Reporting Services reports, and you can use the Power BI integration together, no problem at all. It's just a little bit of basically an updated code set, if you will, when we introduce Power BI. So you'll see me do that in a minute, but just, and I'll show it to you, and it'll make sense then. And then finally, Configuration Manager integration. So there's different things that you can do with Configuration Manager integration. So think of it this way. Whenever you go into the console for just a straight SQL Server Reporting Services, the traditional reports in Config Manager, you have the ability to right-click on those reports, and you can create a new one. You can go in and well, I don't think you have edit. I don't think you have create. Let me go, look at this real quick. In fact, I wasn't going to do this so early, but let's go ahead and bring in the lab. So here's my lab, and here are my reports. And so, like, you can right-click on the report, you can run it in a browser, you can create a subscription, edit, whatever. So there are right-click options here for a standard report. You will have similar right-click options, not exactly the same, but similar right-click options for Power BI reports, which you'll see. And since we're already here, notice the Power BI reports node. So if I click on the Power BI reports node, I'll see all of my Power BI reports that I've imported for the lab, right? Except I don't. There's no reports here. And so I want to show that to you because I'll explain why there's no reports here in just a minute. And I can't really right click on it right now because there's no reports, but you'll see in just a minute what that's all about, right? Okay, get the lab out of there and continue on. So in terms of how this is configured in terms of requirements, right? So one of the things that you do have to have at minimum is SQL Server 2016 reporting services, right? Now, wait, Steve, you just told me that part of this process you're going to go and remove reporting services, right, and add Power BI. Well, yes, that's true. but you do need to be, so I'll say it this way and explain it more in a minute. There's two pathways by which you can configure this. One would assume that you already have SQL Server reporting services installed. That's likely the case for most customers. And if that's the case, then you do want to move ahead and have SQL Server 2016 before you attempt to go do all of this. In fact, well, let me just pause here. You'll see this again in a minute, but since we're talking about it, there's two pathways. The first one is that you have SQL Server reporting services installed already, and you want to introduce Power BI integration. And so you will have SQL Server 2016 reporting services installed. Well, you will have reporting services installed. It may not be SQL Server 2016, right? In my case, whenever I was getting ready to do this session here, I had SQL Server 2014 in my lab. So the first step I needed to do was upgrade from SQL Server 2014 to SQL Server 2016, and then I could go forward and remove reporting services, do the different things you'll see me do in a minute. So a question that might come up is, well, do you need to go through all that? Can you just remove reporting services prior to upgrading to SQL Server 2016? And the answer is, I don't know about that. Yeah, I would strongly recommend moving forward to SQL 2016 with reporting services intact. That way, if there's any dependencies or different things that get added to the database and different things, you will have those items. And then when you move forward, you will be where you need to be, right? So suffice it to say, SQL Server 2016 or better. The other option is you don't have reporting services installed yet at all, and there's a little bit easier pathway for that, right? Because you don't have to factor in SQL Server reporting services being there. So I'm not going to talk about that one in any stretch, because the first one really kind of includes the second one in it anyway. Okay. So Power BI report server license, definitely need to have that. Yes, this all is on-prem, but still you need the license. At least the part that you're going to see me do is on-prem, but you still need the license. You're going to need a piece of software called Power BI report server, and then also Power BI desktop. Now, with Power BI desktop, there's a couple of versions. You can go get Power BI desktop from the Microsoft Store, as an example. That's not what you want. You want the Power BI desktop that's optimized for Power BI report server. And you'll see in a minute the difference there. I mean, they look the same. They work very similar, but the plumbing behind helps plug in if you have the right version. If you don't have the right version, it won't work. Last thing is to call out is Power BI reports do not support role-based administration, right? Don't support RBAC at all. So there was a great deal of effort a while back, I think it was 2012 of ConfigMgr, to make sure that our reports supported the role-based access component of Configuration Manager. And they do, and it does it great. But Power BI reports don't do that, so just be aware. If you are running Power BI reports, they will just show the same data to everyone. It doesn't matter what role they're in. Okay. So how does this thing actually work? So what I've got here is a 10,000 foot view, a few series of graphics trying to describe to you the process of installing this and getting it integrated. So the way I have this set up graphically right now is just for illustration purposes, right? So I have my primary site server over here, which also has SQL. I have my SQL reporting services point site system role on a separate server. And then I have my SQL server over here that hosts the reporting services configuration and the database over here. Now, in truth, in my lab, all three of these are on the same server. And these can be on the same server, right? And you can put them wherever you need to put them. This is just to kind of split things out, help illustrate what's going on. So in this configuration, the very first thing you're going to want to do, and again, this assumes you have SQL Server reporting services installed in your environment. Very first thing you're going to want to do is back up your SQL Server reporting services encryption key. Right? I'll show you where to do that in a second. Now, this is something that I would recommend you do regardless of your configuration, but the key point of backing this up is if you have taken the time to build any custom reports and you don't back up the encryption key, then you have lost all of those custom reports. And you can certainly re-import them as long as you have the source, right? But you've lost access to all of those custom reports, so just be very aware. Once you've backed up the encryption keys, the next step is you're going to uninstall reporting services component and install the and configure Power BI reporting server. Now, what you might imply from here, and if you do, it's accurate, is you're going to remove the inbuilt reporting services component from SQL. But then you're going to put it right back effectively when you install Power BI reporting, because Power BI reporting not only has Power BI, but it includes the base for being able to understand just standard SQL Server reporting services type stuff as well, as you'll see, right? And then finally, you're going to go and import the encryption keys again, right? So that's very high level of how this works. The next thing I want to show you is how to go configure this. And before I move on, probably in, I don't know, a lot of years of building presentations like this, I have never really shown screenshots of how a process works. I've always shown you how the process works directly. In this case, I've decided to do screenshots because if I were presenting this live, there would be significant delays as different components are installed, uninstalled, and different things that I just wouldn't want to make an audience sit through. And so I built this in a way to just use screenshots in case there is a live presentation, then it won't be dependent on long delays like that where where I'm staring at the audience and the audience is staring at me, right? And plus, it's pretty intuitive how all this works. And so having the screenshots is not going to be a detriment in this case at all. You're going to be able to see it and understand it pretty easy. So let's jump in. So in terms of configuring this, so here's what I was telling you about. The two options: install in SSRS already deployed scenario and when no SSRS is there. So I've already covered that. I'm going to focus the rest of this on when SSRS is already deployed. And the process, if it's not, is very similar, minus a couple of steps. Okay. Now, in terms of the screenshots, I saw there were a couple of blogs out there referenced at the bottom, and a credit given to the authors of those blogs, where they had already taken some screenshots, and I just used those because instead of just doing it again in my lab, make use of those. So here's the first one. First step in the process: back up your SSRS encryption key. So you go into Report Server Configuration Manager and you back up the key, and it will produce for you a file called an SNK file. You'll give it some password. You'll give it a password whenever you save it off, and then supply that password when you bring it back in, and you're good. So this is saving off the encryption key. Very, very, very important first step. After that, we're going to go into Configuration Manager and we're going to uninstall our reporting services point, right? So here you'll just want to uninstall the reporting service point and make sure by monitoring the log that it is in fact gone before you proceed, right? Should be a pretty quick process and really easy to go through the SRS setup log and see that it has been uninstalled. If there's problems, then certainly clear those before proceeding, but should be generally pretty easy. So once we have that role removed, now we're going to go through and we're going to uninstall SQL reporting services. So in this case, I'm using, or the screenshot is showing, SQL Server 2016. You might have a little bit of a different way that you uninstall reporting services depending on the version. So the another example I saw was using SQL 2017, and there was a reporting services entry specifically already in programs and features, and so that's the only one needed to be selected and uninstalled. So however you do it, really pretty straightforward. Just make sure that you uninstall just the SQL reporting services piece and nothing else, right? Okay, so once that's uninstalled, then the next thing is, I jumped too far ahead, install Power BI Server. So this is something that's downloaded from the internet, you can install this. Make sure again that you have the latest version, different things, right? And this is just the screenshots as you go through. You're going to install reporting services, Power BI report server. You're going to choose whatever way you want to install it, accept the license terms, and then go through and do the install. And then finally, specify the install location. And then finally go ahead after you've installed it and configure. So what's going to happen when you configure this is you're going to get back, surprisingly, report server configuration manager. So it's still there, right? So you uninstalled reporting services or SQL reporting services, which you would think might take away the configuration manager. Not necessarily, right? Because you might have other reporting servers that you want to use this on, either way. But when you put Power BI report server on there, basically you're putting the same engine plus Power BI underneath. And so you can use report server configuration manager to go and configure it. So one of the things that I didn't mention that is absolutely critical, when you uninstall SQL Server reporting services from SQL, make absolutely sure that you preserve the database. You might even want to back up the database to be certain before you uninstall. When I removed my SQL 2016 reporting server, I paid attention. I didn't see any place to choose whether or not to preserve the database, but just be aware and make sure that you do preserve that database before you or while you're uninstalling SQL Server reporting services. Because here, you're going to want to reinstall or attach back to that database, right? So there is a default database that is suggested when you install Power BI reporting. What you're going to want to do is just come over here and change that database and specify back the report server database that you want to use, and then you should be good. Actually, sorry, what did I do? Yeah, so here's the database. You're going to want to go through the process and specify that report server database that you want to use and link up Power BI reporting to that, right? Then the next thing you're going to want to do is import the encryption keys again. So that file that you saved off, you're going to be asked for a password, where it is. Import those encryption keys again so that you're able to use that database. And then finally, you're going to want to apply the web server URL. So there's two web server URLs here and here. I don't know why, but it seems as if the web server URLs are kind of left inactive. And so you have to go through and apply. Just click apply, that's it. And the system will go configure those and you'll get green check marks, hopefully, and you'll be good to go at that stage. If you miss this step, then things aren't going to work. Your reporting page won't come up and different things, right? Okay, and then finally, once you get all that done, you're going to go ahead and reinstall your reporting services point in Configuration Manager. And again, monitor the log, wait for it to complete, make sure it completes. And then last thing is you're going to install Power BI Desktop. So again, make sure it is a version optimized for Power BI Server, and also make sure it is at minimum September 2019. Now you need at minimum September 2019 version of Power BI Desktop and Power BI Report Server. In my lab, I'm using, I think, May 2020 of both. Either way, right? These are the minimums that you have to have, but general recommendation is always to install the latest. All right, cool. So that's configured. It's not hard, really. Oh, there's one more thing here. So once you get it configured, you're going to have the integration. Now, even without configuring this, you will have the node for integration, right? It's there. But after you do the integration, you'll be able to actually work with that node and see some things, right? So again, it's not a hard process. Yeah, there's a couple of steps. Yeah, it takes a few minutes to uninstall and reinstall and different things, but it's not a challenging process at all. Just follow the instructions and follow kind of the steps that I showed you, and you should be good to go, no problem. Okay, so all of that said, let's get into the fun stuff, and that is actually seeing this once we actually have it configured already. So let's step through a bit of a demo of this. So to do that, let me pull in the lab. So here is my lab. Looks like the Configuration Manager console is closed. Let's open that back up. Cool. Now, what I'm going to do is navigate to the reports node. And again, so after the configuration, you already saw this, but after the configuration, we do have the default SQL Server Reporting Services reports here. No problem. Those reports work. We can interact with them just like always. No issue at all, right? And I've already shown, there they are. And so I've already shown you the Power BI reports node and the fact that it's empty, right? I have the same ability to expand and there's nothing there, right? So this is a totally empty reporting node. And so the question is, why is that, right? Why is this totally empty? Well, let me go ahead and show you. So if I go into the standard, just SQL web page, right? So let's see. Let's go into the reports page. You will see that I do have Power BI reports. These are the Power BI reports right here, the ones that I'm using for an example. Right? Another thing, before I even dig into this, notice this is Power BI report server now. So you can tell it is an updated version to support Power BI just by the name there, but I'm seeing what I'm accustomed to seeing from prior to integrating Power BI, the same kind of format, if I go directly to the reports web page in SQL Server Reporting Services, I would see very similar things, but this is now updated anyway. So the point of this is, I have 5 reports here that I've imported. Here's my Configuration Manager folder, right? Now I can run these reports, no issue. I can run them all day long, right? I'll click on one. It'll go and start to render. I won't let it continue or finish loading data, but it'll start to render like you would expect. You can run it no problem. The point of this is if you have reports that are not underneath the config manager underscore site code folder, they will not show up in the console at all. That's true for SSRS reports, standard SSRS reports. It's also true for Power BI reports, right? And so what I'm going to do is just go back and move a couple of things around so that you can see. I'm not going to do all of them, but I want to show you a couple of examples. So this one, I'm going to move, and I'm just simply going to put it under a little folder here that I have called Demo Power BI. And so I'm going to select that and save it so it moves. Now, here's another one because this might be a question that you have. So let's just go ahead and cover it. So I'm going to move this one, and I'm just going to move it to a different folder right here. Done. So those are moved, right? So I did this to show you 2 things. One, if I go back into the Config Manager console now, and I refresh this node, then now I see 2 Power BI reports. And the other thing that I see, you might ask, well, do I need to put them all in a specific folder? No. Config Manager will look through and find any folder that contains a Power BI report and show it to you and also show you the folder it's in. Now, be aware, the category, so look over here at reports, right? The category here, administrative security, that's lifted from the folder name. And so this is lifted category from the folder name. So demo-Power BI, that's not a real descriptive folder name perhaps of what those reports actually do. So you might think about how you're going to name folders if you're going to do something custom, right? Anyway, that's kind of off track from where we are, but kind of related. So just wanted to mention it to you. Okay, so we definitely have that in here. You see that the reports are there once we move them under the config manager underscore site code folder. Okay, so now that we've got a couple of reports, let's look at the right-click options. And so again, these are similar, different than the ones for classic SQL Server Reporting Services reports, but they are here. So the ability to run in a browser, the ability to edit. So edit is something that's in common between SSRS reports and the Power BI reports. So in both cases, if you select edit, we're going to open up a tool to allow you to, in fact, edit the report. In the case of SQL Server Reporting Services, the classic reports, that will be Report Builder. In the case of Power BI, that will be Power BI Desktop. So let's go ahead and open that up. For a second, you'll see it's loading in the background. And there it comes. So while that's loading, let me go ahead and just show you. I mentioned this session is not going to be one about authoring reports, right? But you are going to see, and you already have seen, some Power BI reports here. So I pulled these reports that I'm going to show you just from downloading on the web, right? Downloading from the internet. I don't sanction or recommend any particular ones of these, other than to say I would recommend that you take a look at some examples to kind of help you understand how to build reports, what options are available to you immediately, and so on. But I've actually got these reports. It's taken a bit to load. I've actually got these reports and so on out here. So I have PBIT. So this is one, CM metric dashboard. This is originally came in the PBIT, the template format. I've saved it as a PBIX, and so that's out there. And some of these are just in PBIX and so on, right? But these templates are there, and I'll show you some of them as soon as this thing loads. Okay, so I canceled that because it was opening the report and it was taking a little bit too long. So I just opened this directly, right? Which is fine because what I was going to do anyway is just show you the PBIX report. So here's the main page. So if you're trying to create a report and you don't have, in fact, this is dumb. Apologies. Let me go ahead and close this back out again. And I'm just going to show you in the console. So up in the ribbon, I don't have to right click on the report and say edit, right? That'll bring that report up in Power BI, which I don't want to do. I can go up here and say create report, and that will open Power BI just like I showed you to the main page. And then I can go and go from there and work with the PBIX and such that I want to show you. So stand by. Okay, so we are back to the place that I was showing you. But anyway, just wanted to show you that. Now, I want to show you the PBIX. And so I'm going to go, oops, sorry, that was my start menu. I'm going to open the report. And so here's going to take me. So you see PBIX is the extension. That's what it's going to filter to. So I'm just going to choose that one, hit open. And so take a second for this one to load. But PBIX, again, comes with data, right? It already has data in it, right? So when you see this load and it's in process, you'll see that the various elements of the report already have data that are being represented, right? So the idea is you might have a PBIX that you want to publish out and so on, and you load it up and you can then save it out to your reporting, your Power BI reporting server. And so notice this, right? There's pending changes. Right? I'm not going to worry about applying those in a real world environment. You probably would, but in this case, I just want to go ahead and be able to save this out and show you how to save it out. So here's some of the data. You already see some of the dashboard stuff is here, right? I can browse the report, different things, right? But really what I want to do is save this out. So to publish this so that ConfigMgr can use it, I'm going to save as Power BI report server. And so that's going to pull up and say, hey, do I want to apply changes? No, I'm going to bypass them, apply them later. And it's going to pull up and show me the URL that I care about. I'm going to say, okay. And by default, it's going to take me to the root level of the reporting server service, right? So if you save it here, you're never going to see it in the console, just like I showed you. But take it and put it inside the ConfigMgr_SAP in my case, and you will be able to see it, right? So that's just a little bit of detail for you. So that's one way, right? Now, that's PBIX. What if I have a PBIT, right? PBIT. Well, you can open that in Power BI, no problem. So let me open here. And by default, PBIX, but I'm going to say asterisk. Great. And here are my PBITs. So I'll just double click on this and it'll go open the template. What it will do though is this is a template. It's not going to contain data. To be able to get data, we're going to have to run queries and different things. And so it's going to ask me, you see it's opening a new instance. I'm going to go ahead and close that one. It's going to ask me to approve running some queries in this case. Go ahead and close. Approve running some queries. So this might take a second to load because it has to pull in a decent chunk of data. So I'll pause and come right back, and I'll show you approving the query. Okay, so it loaded. The first thing it's going to ask me is my SQL Server name and my database name. Again, this is a template, so it's going to pull the data fresh here. Now you see it's going to refresh some of the data that it needs for this particular Power BI dashboard. And so as it goes through, you'll see this change. It's evaluating. You'll see, hey, waiting on other query, hey, et cetera, right? It's starting to shift now. And then you'll see in a second that it's going to ask me to approve using a given query in my environment. Right? So this is where it takes maybe a couple of minutes to get that going. You see some things changing, on the screen. So I'll pause, and when it's going to ask me to approve the query, which should be the next thing, I'll come back. Well, actually, interesting. It didn't stop and ask me to approve the query, maybe because I already have this dashboard that I've approved a couple of times. Not sure. But you may see some places where it will ask you, hey, here's a SQL query. Are you okay running this kind of deal? And you can say yes, no, whatever. It's also good because that will allow you to actually see the SQL query that's being run against your environment, right? Anyway, this is a PBIT. It's in the environment. I have not saved this out, so I have two choices now. I can either save this as a PBIX format, which now will contain the data, so I can say save as, right? And it will default to PBIX, right? Here's PBIX. And that's how I got my PBIX versions of some of the PBITs that I'm using. Or I can simply go and say save as and go to my report server like I did, and then I can have it published to Power BI reporting, just like I showed you. No problem, same process. So I'll just go ahead and cancel that out here, right? Okay, so that's it, right? That's the demo. I want to show it to you. Working with this is not difficult. Again, this session is about Power BI integration, not authoring. Authoring, the sky's really the limit. Now that you have this integration, and you can have these reports at your fingertips in the ConfigMgr console and be able to publish them that way, right? You have so many options in the Power BI world to use ConfigMgr, to publish on the web, to distribute them that way, to pull data from multiple data sources and munge them together, right? This is really going off on a tangent. I told you I wouldn't talk about authoring, but one of the beautiful things I think about with Power BI is if you have multiple data sources, like maybe you have an asset database in your organization, and you have other databases in your organization, and you want to bring that data together. I know of customers who will go out to the individual databases with queries and pull specific data into a unified database and then query against that database. Well, you don't need to do that anymore. You can just have multiple data sources connecting out and bring that data into Power BI and be able to use it that way. It's really, really, really cool, right? So anyway, all right, so in terms of troubleshooting tips and tricks, I really don't have anything here. This is not usually a challenge, right? It's just using the tools to publish and author the reports. The one thing I mentioned is making sure that when you do deinstall the reporting services point and reinstall the reporting services point site system role in ConfigMgr as a part of setting this up, to pay attention to the log. Absolutely. Other things, I mentioned the tips and tricks using PBIX, PBIT files, but again, not a whole lot more I want to mention besides that. So we will call that a session and close it down here, and we will see you next time.